Queen Victoria Adelheid stood at the tall windows of Windsor Palace, her fingers tracing the cold glass as she watched the morning mist roll across the vast gardens. The estate stretched endlessly before her, yet she had never felt more confined. 3 days had passed since the funeral of Prince Consort Edmund, her beloved husband of 47 years, and the weight of the crown felt heavier than it ever had before. The silence in the royal chambers was deafening. For nearly 5 decades, Edmund's gentle voice had filled these halls, discussing matters of state, sharing quiet jokes, or simply humming old melodies as he read his morning papers. Now, only the distant sound of staff moving through corridors and the occasional chiming of ancient clocks marked the passage of time. Lady Margaret Thornfield, her most trusted lady-in-waiting, entered the room with practiced silence, carrying a silver tray bearing the morning's correspondence. The stack of letters and official documents seemed impossibly tall, each envelope bearing the seal of various government departments, foreign dignitaries, or charitable organizations requiring the Queen's attention. "Your Majesty," Lady Margaret said softly, her voice carrying the careful tone everyone had adopted since Edmund's passing. "The Prime Minister has requested an audience this afternoon. There are several urgent matters requiring your signature, and the Commonwealth representatives have arrived for tomorrow's scheduled meetings." Victoria nodded without turning from the window. She had known this moment would come. The world did not pause for grief, not even for a queen's grief. The machinery of government, the endless demands of state, the expectations of millions of subjects across the realm, all continued their relentless march forward, regardless of her personal loss. "The children have been calling throughout the morning," Lady Margaret continued, referring to the Queen's 4 adult children, now all serving in various capacities within the royal household or pursuing their own charitable endeavors. "Prince Alexander wishes to discuss the upcoming state visit from a Nordic federation, and Princess Charlotte has concerns about the memorial service arrangements." The mention of her children stirred something within Victoria. They, too, were grieving the loss of their father, yet they understood, as she did, that duty came before personal sorrow. It was a lesson Edmund had taught them all, that service to the realm was not merely a job, but a sacred trust passed down through generations. Victoria finally turned from the window, her reflection catching momentarily in the glass. A woman of 73 years, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, her posture straight and regal even in her private moments of sorrow. The morning dress she wore was simple yet elegant, the deep black fabric serving as a stark reminder of a recent loss. "Have the staff prepared the blue drawing room for the Prime Minister's visit," she instructed, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. "And please inform the kitchen that we will be serving the Earl Grey blend, Edmund's favorite." She paused, the weight of that last statement settling between them. "I believe he would have wanted the traditions to continue." Lady Margaret bowed her head respectfully. She had served the royal family for over 20 years and had witnessed firsthand the deep partnership between the Queen and Prince Consort. Their relationship had been the stuff of fairy tales, a love match that had also proven to be a powerful political alliance, with Edmund serving as Victoria's closest advisor and confidant in all matters of state. As Lady Margaret departed to make the necessary arrangements, Victoria moved to her private study, a smaller chamber adjacent to her bedroom that had always served as her personal sanctuary. The room was lined with leather-bound books, many of them gifts from Edmund over the years, and the walls were adorned with family portraits and official photographs documenting nearly half a century of royal service. On the mahogany desk sat a framed photograph of their wedding day, Victoria radiant in white silk and ancient family diamonds, Edmund handsome and confident in his military dress uniform. They had been so young then, barely in their 20s, full of hope and determination to serve their people with honor and distinction. The photograph seemed to mock her now with its captured joy, a reminder of a time when the future had stretched endlessly before them, full of shared dreams and common purpose. The morning's correspondence lay before her like a mountain to be conquered. letters from heads of state expressing condolences, reports from various government ministries requiring her review, invitations to state functions, and requests for royal patronage from dozens of charitable organizations. Each document represented lives affected by her decisions, people depending on her leadership, and institutions requiring her guidance. Victoria picked up the first letter, her hand trembling slightly as she broke the wax seal. It was from the president of the European Alliance, expressing his sympathy for her loss and his hopes for continued cooperation between their nations. The formal language felt cold and distant, yet she knew the sentiment behind it was genuine. Edmund had worked tirelessly to maintain these international relationships, often serving as an unofficial ambassador during state visits and diplomatic functions. The second letter came from a small village in the northern provinces, where flooding had destroyed dozens of homes and displaced hundreds of families. The local officials were requesting royal assistance in coordinating relief efforts and seeking permission to establish a temporary shelter on Crown lands. This was exactly the sort of matter that Edmund would have handled personally, visiting the affected areas and ensuring that aid reached those most in need. As Victoria read through letter after letter, she began to understand the full scope of the responsibilities that now fell solely on her shoulders. For 47 years, she and Edmund had functioned as a team, dividing the enormous workload of modern monarchy between them. He had been her sounding board for difficult decisions, her partner in public appearances, and her strongest supporter during times of crisis. The telephone rang, its sharp sound cutting through the quiet morning air. Victoria hesitated before answering, knowing that once she picked up that receiver, she would be stepping back into her role as sovereign, leaving behind the luxury of private grief. "Your Majesty," came the familiar voice of Sir William Pemberton, her private secretary. "I apologize for the early intrusion, but we have received word from the Commonwealth Office regarding the situation in New Zealand. The volcanic eruption has worsened, and they are formally requesting emergency aid from the Crown." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling around her shoulders like a mantle. Thousands of miles away, her subjects were facing a natural disaster, and they looked to her for leadership and support. This was not a matter that could wait for her grief to run its course. "Schedule an emergency meeting with the Commonwealth Secretary for this morning," she instructed, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And contact the Royal Navy. I want to know what ships are available for immediate deployment. We will also need to coordinate with the Red Cross and other relief organizations." As she hung up the phone, Victoria realized that something fundamental had shifted within her. The overwhelming grief was still there, the sense of profound loss that threatened to consume her entirely. But underneath it, she could feel the stirring of something else: purpose, duty, and the knowledge that her people needed her now more than ever. The Queen stood up from her desk and walked to the window once more, but this time her gaze was focused and determined rather than lost in sorrow. The gardens below were beginning to show signs of spring. Early flowers pushing through the soil, trees budding with new life, the eternal cycle of renewal that had continued for centuries within these palace grounds. She thought of Edmund and the countless conversations they had shared about the nature of monarchy and service. He had often said that the crown was not a burden to be endured, but a trust to be honored. The British people, along with the millions of subjects across the Commonwealth, had placed their faith in the institution of monarchy not because of any divine right, but because of the commitment to serve their interests above all else. Victoria returned to her desk and picked up her fountain pen, the same one Edmund had given her on their 10th wedding anniversary. She began to draft her response to the New Zealand crisis, carefully choosing words that would convey both her personal concern for the victims and her government's commitment to providing immediate assistance. As she wrote, she could almost hear Edmund's voice offering gentle suggestions, reminding her to consider the broader political implications of her response, encouraging her to think about how this crisis might affect other Commonwealth nations facing similar challenges. His presence felt almost tangible in the familiar routine of governance, as if he were sitting across from her, as he had done thousands of times before. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the study floor. Victoria worked steadily through the pile of correspondence, making decisions, signing documents, and slowly reclaiming her role as sovereign. With each letter she answered and each decision she made, she felt herself growing stronger, more confident in her ability to carry on without her beloved partner. By the time Lady Margaret returned with the morning tea service, Victoria had made significant progress through the day's business. The lady-in-waiting noticed the change immediately. The Queen's posture was more erect, her movements more purposeful, and there was a spark of determination in her eyes that had been absent for days. "Your Majesty appears to be feeling better this morning," Lady Margaret observed carefully as she set down the delicate China tea service. Victoria looked up from her work and offered a small, sad smile. "I am reminded that grief is a luxury that queens cannot always afford," she replied. "Edmund understood this better than anyone. He would not want me to abandon our people in their time of need simply because my heart is broken." She gestured toward the letters spread across her desk. "There is a village in the north dealing with floods, a volcanic crisis in New Zealand, and diplomatic matters requiring immediate attention. These people depend on the stability and continuity of the crown. Edmund spent his life supporting that institution, and I honor his memory best by ensuring it continues to function effectively." Lady Margaret nodded understandingly. She had witnessed the Queen's strength during previous crises: economic recessions, terrorist attacks, natural disasters, and political upheavals that had tested the very foundations of the kingdom. Through each challenge, Victoria had demonstrated the kind of steady leadership that had made her one of the most respected monarchs in British history. "The staff has been wondering," Lady Margaret said hesitantly, "when Your Majesty might be ready to resume public appearances. The people have been asking about you, expressing their concern and support during this difficult time." Victoria considered the question carefully. She knew that her subjects were genuinely worried about her well-being, but she also understood that her public appearances served a larger purpose than mere ceremony. In times of uncertainty or crisis, the visible presence of the monarchy provided a sense of continuity and stability that helped hold the social fabric together. "I believe," she said slowly, "that it is time for the Queen to return to her duties. Edmund would not want me to hide away in grief while our people face their own challenges. Schedule a public appearance for tomorrow, perhaps a visit to that flooded village in the north. The people there need to know that their sovereign is aware of their suffering and committed to their recovery." As Lady Margaret hurried away to make the necessary arrangements, Victoria felt a mixture of anticipation and trepidation about returning to public life. The thought of facing crowds, cameras, and the inevitable questions about how she was coping with her loss felt overwhelming. Yet she knew that this was precisely what was expected of her: to demonstrate grace under pressure, to show strength in the face of adversity, and to put the needs of her people above her own personal pain. The afternoon brought the promised meeting with Prime Minister James Harrison, a capable leader who had worked closely with both the Queen and Prince Consort on numerous domestic and international issues. He arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, his usual confident demeanor tempered by appropriate solemnity for the circumstances. "Your Majesty," he said as he entered the blue drawing room, bowing respectfully, "please accept my continued condolences for your tremendous loss. Prince Consort Edmund was a remarkable man who served this nation with distinction." Victoria inclined her head graciously. "Thank you, Prime Minister. Edmund held you in high regard and often spoke of his confidence in your leadership during these challenging times." They settled into the comfortable chairs that had hosted countless such meetings over the years. The Prime Minister opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder containing the day's most pressing matters: the New Zealand volcanic crisis, ongoing negotiations with the European Union regarding trade agreements, and a developing situation in one of the African Commonwealth nations where political tensions were escalating. "I must be honest with you, Your Majesty," Prime Minister Harrison said carefully. "The international community has been watching closely to see how the monarchy will function during this transition period. There are some who question whether the institution can maintain its effectiveness without Prince Consort Edmund's contributions." Victoria's eyes flashed with something approaching anger, though her voice remained controlled. "Those who doubt the resilience of this institution clearly do not understand its history or its purpose. The British monarchy has survived civil wars, world wars, economic depressions, and countless personal tragedies. It will certainly survive the loss of one man, beloved though he was." The Prime Minister nodded, clearly relieved by her strong response. "I hope you would feel that way, Your Majesty. We have several opportunities in the coming weeks to demonstrate the continuity and strength of the Crown. The Nordic Federation State visit next month will be particularly important, as will the Commonwealth Leaders' Conference in the autumn." They spent the next 2 hours reviewing each matter in detail, with Victoria asking probing questions and offering thoughtful insights that demonstrated her complete grasp of the complex issues facing the realm. It was a performance that would have made Edmund proud. The careful balance of constitutional monarchy, where the sovereign advised, encouraged, and warned her government while maintaining the delicate separation between crown and politics. As the meeting concluded, Victoria felt a sense of satisfaction that she had not experienced since Edmund's death. The familiar rhythm of governance, the intellectual challenge of complex problems, and the knowledge that her decisions would affect millions of lives had rekindled something essential within her, the sense of purpose that had defined her entire adult life. That evening, as she prepared for bed, Victoria stood once more at the windows of her private chambers. The palace grounds were quiet now, lit only by the soft glow of security lighting and the distant lights of London beyond the gates. She thought about the day that lay ahead, her first public appearance since Edmund's funeral, the return to a schedule that would once again consume her days and nights. The grief was still there, as sharp and painful as ever. She knew it would remain with her for the rest of her life, a constant reminder of the love she had lost and the partnership that had defined nearly half a century. But alongside that grief, she could feel something else growing stronger: determination, resolve, and the unshakable conviction that her duty to her people transcended her personal sorrow. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter in her reign, one that she would write alone, but not without purpose. The crown would continue, the monarchy would endure, and the people she served would never have cause to doubt her commitment to their welfare. In honoring that commitment, she would honor Edmund's memory and the values they had shared throughout their remarkable partnership. As she prepared for sleep, Victoria whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the 47 years she had been blessed to share with Edmund, and a plea for strength to carry on the work they had begun together. Tomorrow, Queen Victoria Adelheid would step back into her role as sovereign, and the realm would be reminded why the institution of monarchy had endured for over 1,000 years. The morning of Queen Victoria's first public appearance dawned gray and drizzling, as if the weather itself reflected the somber mood that had settled over the kingdom since Prince Consort Edmund's death. The media would be watching her every gesture, analyzing her demeanor for signs of weakness or instability. This appearance would send a message not just to the flood victims, but to the entire Commonwealth and the watching world about the monarchy's resilience in the face of personal tragedy. The drive to Millbrook took 90 minutes through countryside that showed increasing evidence of the recent flooding. What had once been productive farmland now lay under sheets of brown water, with only the tops of fence posts and the occasional barn roof visible above the surface. Emergency vehicles dotted the landscape, and temporary shelters have been erected on higher ground to house the displaced families. As the royal convoy approached the village center, Victoria could see crowds gathering despite the early hour and inclement weather. Word of her visit had spread quickly through the tight-knit community, and people had walked miles from their temporary accommodations to catch a glimpse of their sovereign during their time of crisis. "Your Majesty," said Dr. William Ashford, the village doctor who had coordinated much of the relief effort, as he greeted her at the evacuation center. "We are deeply honored by your presence here today. The people have been through so much, and your visit means more than words can express." Victoria stepped out of her car and immediately felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. Photographers' cameras clicked incessantly as she made her way toward the crowd of flood victims, many of whom were seeing their monarch in person for the first time in their lives. She could see the mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and hope in their faces as they waited to meet her. "Mrs. Henderson," Dr. Ashford said, introducing an elderly woman whose home had been completely destroyed in the flooding. "This is Her Majesty the Queen." The old woman curtsied awkwardly, her eyes filling with tears. "Your Majesty, I'm so sorry for your loss. We all loved Prince Edmund dearly. He visited our village just 2 years ago for the church restoration ceremony." Victoria felt her throat tighten at the memory. Edmund had indeed insisted on attending that small ceremony, despite having several other obligations that day. He had believed deeply in the importance of connecting with ordinary citizens, especially in rural communities that rarely saw members of the royal family. "Thank you for your kind words," Victoria replied, taking the woman's weathered hand in both of hers. Prince Edmund always spoke fondly of his visits to Millbrook. He would be deeply concerned about what you and your neighbors have endured. "Tell me, what can be done to help you rebuild?" Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened with surprise at being asked for her opinion by the Queen herself. "Well, Your Majesty, we need temporary housing for the families whose homes are gone completely. And the school was damaged. The children have nowhere to go for their lessons. The church basement is flooded, so we can't hold our community meetings there anymore." Victoria listened intently, asking follow-up questions about the timeline for repairs, the availability of building materials, and the coordination between local authorities and national relief organizations. Her genuine interest and informed questions quickly drew a crowd of other flood victims, each eager to share their stories and concerns with their sovereign. Among the group was young Tommy Fletcher, age 8, whose family had lost their farm in the flooding. He approached the Queen with the fearless curiosity of childhood, tugging gently on her coat to get her attention. "Your Majesty," he said in a clear, piping voice, "my mom says you're sad because your husband died. My granddad died last year, and I was very sad too. But Mom says he's watching over us from heaven, so maybe your husband is watching over you too." The simplicity and sincerity of the child's words struck Victoria more powerfully than any formal condolence she had received. She knelt down to Tommy's eye level, ignoring the muddy ground and the clicking cameras surrounding them. "Thank you, Tommy," she said softly. "That is a very kind and wise thing to say. Your grandfather must have been very proud of such a thoughtful grandson. I hope you and your family will be able to return to your farm very soon." Tommy beamed with pride at having spoken with the Queen, and the moment was captured by photographers whose images would later appear on front pages across the Commonwealth. The picture of the mourning Queen kneeling in the mud to comfort a flood victim's child would become one of the defining images of her reign, symbolizing her commitment to putting duty above personal grief. The visit continued for 2 hours, with Victoria touring the temporary housing facilities, meeting with local emergency coordinators, and speaking individually with dozens of flood victims. Each conversation revealed new aspects of the crisis and reinforced her understanding of the practical challenges facing rural communities during natural disasters. At the village school, which had suffered significant water damage, Victoria met with a headmistress and several teachers who had been working tirelessly to continue education for their students in makeshift classrooms. The dedication of these educators reminded her of Edmund's passionate advocacy for educational opportunities in rural areas. Prince Edmund often spoke about the importance of maintaining educational continuity during emergencies. Victoria told the assembled teachers. He would be impressed by her resourcefulness and commitment to these children's future. The headmistress, Mrs. Caroline Webb, had tears in her eyes as she responded. "Your Majesty, Prince Edmund's support for our rural schools program made such a difference. The mobile library he helped establish has been our lifeline during this crisis. We've been able to continue lessons even while the children are staying in the evacuation center. Victoria made note of several specific needs the school had identified: replacement textbooks, temporary classroom furniture, and funding for psychological counseling services for children traumatized by the flooding. These were exactly the sorts of concrete problems that the Royal Foundations could address quickly and effectively. The most challenging part of the visit came when Victoria met with the Fletcher family in their temporary accommodation. Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher had lost not only their home, but also most of their livestock and farming equipment in the flood. The financial devastation was complete, and they faced the possibility of having to abandon farming entirely after 3 generations of working the same land. "We don't know what we're going to do, Your Majesty," confessed Mrs. Fletcher, her voice barely above a whisper. "The insurance won't cover everything, and we don't have the savings to start over." Tom's heartbroken about his animals. He raised those sheep from lambs. Victoria spent nearly 30 minutes with the Fletcher family, learning about their specific circumstances and the broader challenges facing agricultural communities hit by natural disasters. She discovered that many farming families lacked adequate flood insurance because the premiums were prohibitively expensive, leaving them vulnerable to exactly this type of catastrophic loss. "I want you to know that your situation will not be forgotten," Victoria told them firmly. "The Crown Estate has emergency assistance programs for agricultural communities, and I will personally ensure that your family receives the support you need to rebuild. Your son Tommy has already shown me what a strong and caring family you are." As the visit neared its end, Victoria gathered with local officials and community leaders to discuss longer-term recovery plans. The conversation revealed the complexity of disaster response in rural areas, the need for improved early warning systems, better coordination between national and local authorities, and more robust insurance mechanisms for agricultural communities. "What strikes me most," Victoria said to the assembled group, "is the resilience and mutual support I have witnessed here today. You have faced devastating losses, yet you have come together as a community to care for your most vulnerable members. This is the spirit that makes our nation strong." Dr. Ashford presented Victoria with a small gift from the community, a hand-carved wooden box made from timber salvaged from the damaged church. Inside was a collection of photographs showing Millbrook before the flood, along with a letter signed by every family in the village expressing their gratitude for her visit and their condolences for her loss. "Your Majesty," Dr. Ashford said, "we want you to know that your presence here today has given us hope. Seeing you carry on with your duties despite your own grief reminds us that we too can find the strength to rebuild our lives and our community." The drive back to Windsor was contemplative, with Victoria reflecting on the morning's experiences. The genuine warmth and appreciation of the flood victims had touched her deeply, but more importantly, their resilience had reminded her of fundamental truths about human nature and the responsibilities of leadership. Lady Margaret, who had accompanied her on the visit, broke the silence. "Your Majesty handled that beautifully. The people were clearly moved by your presence, and I believe your visit will make a real difference in their recovery efforts." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "What impressed me most was their strength. These people have lost everything, yet they're already planning how to rebuild. They reminded me that grief and purpose can coexist, that honoring the memory of what we have lost often requires us to continue the work we shared." The afternoon brought a flood of positive media coverage from the Millbrook visit. Headlines praised the Queen's compassionate leadership and her commitment to serving her people despite personal tragedy. Editorial writers compared her visit to legendary moments of royal service during times of national crisis, drawing parallels to her predecessors who had provided stability and comfort during wartime and natural disasters. More importantly, the visit had generated concrete results. By evening, Victoria had received reports that several charitable organizations had committed to additional funding for flood relief. The government had announced an emergency agricultural assistance package, and volunteers from across the region were heading to Millbrook to help with cleanup efforts. That night, Victoria sat in her study reviewing the day's events and planning her response to the issues she had discovered. The wooden box from Millbrook sat on her desk, a tangible reminder of the connection between monarch and subjects that lay at the heart of constitutional monarchy. She opened her personal diary, a practice she had maintained throughout her reign, and began to write about the day's experiences. The act of recording her thoughts and observations had always helped her process complex emotions and identify lessons that could inform future decisions. Today, I remembered why Edmund and I devoted our lives to service, she wrote. The people of Millbrook have endured devastating losses, yet they face the future with courage and determination. Their example reminds me that grief, while profound and necessary, must not be allowed to overshadow our obligations to those who depend on us. Edmund would have been proud of their resilience, just as he would have been proud to see the monarchy continuing its work despite our personal tragedy. As she prepared for bed, Victoria felt a sense of accomplishment that she had not experienced since Edmund's death. The day had been emotionally challenging, filled with reminders of her loss and the weight of expectations upon her. Yet she had met those challenges successfully, providing comfort to those in need while demonstrating that the institution of monarchy remained strong and committed to service. The flood victims had given her a gift far more valuable than the carved wooden box. They had shown her that healing and purpose could coexist, that honoring the memory of those we have lost often requires us to continue the work we shared with them. Edmund had believed deeply in the monarchy's role as a source of stability and compassion during times of crisis. By returning to that role, Victoria was not abandoning her grief, but rather channeling it into service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate the monarchy's continued relevance and effectiveness. The Nordic Federation state visit was approaching, along with numerous other diplomatic and domestic obligations. But tonight, for the first time since Edmund's death, Victoria felt confident that she could meet those challenges while honoring both her personal loss and her public responsibilities. The Queen's successful return to public duties had begun not with grand ceremony or international diplomacy, but with muddy boots in a flood-damaged village, listening to the concerns of ordinary citizens and demonstrating that the Crown remained committed to serving all its subjects regardless of circumstance. It was exactly the kind of authentic, compassionate leadership that Edmund had always advocated, and Victoria knew that her beloved husband would have been proud of how she had chosen to honor his memory. The success of the Millbrook visit had generated momentum that carried Queen Victoria through the following weeks with renewed energy and purpose. Each morning brought fresh challenges that demanded her attention. Commonwealth affairs, domestic policy briefings, and the endless stream of diplomatic correspondence that formed the backbone of modern monarchy. Yet she found herself approaching these responsibilities with a clarity of purpose that had been absent during the immediate aftermath of Edmund's death. The palace had settled into new rhythms without the prince consort's presence. His private secretary had been reassigned to assist with other royal duties. His office had been quietly converted into additional space for Victoria's expanding correspondence. And the daily schedule had been restructured to reflect the reality that all decisions now flowed through a single source rather than the partnership that had characterized the previous 4 decades. Lady Margaret had proven invaluable during this transition, anticipating needs before they arose and ensuring that the machinery of monarchy continued to function smoothly despite the significant change in its structure. She had taken on many of the smaller ceremonial duties that Edmund had previously handled, freeing Victoria to focus on the most pressing matters of state. The morning of March 15th brought news that would test Victoria's renewed confidence in ways she had not anticipated. Sir William Pemberton arrived at her study with an expression that immediately communicated the gravity of the situation he was about to present. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "we have received an urgent communication from our embassy in the Central African Republic of Zambia. President Kawema Sani has been overthrown in a military coup, and British citizens in the capital are requesting immediate evacuation assistance." Victoria set down her fountain pen and focused her full attention on Sir William's briefing. Zambia was a Commonwealth nation with significant British business interests and a large expatriate community. More importantly, it was a country where she and Edmund had made an official state visit just 3 years earlier, establishing personal relationships with democratic leaders who were now presumably in grave danger. "What do we know about the new military leadership?" Victoria asked, her mind already working through the diplomatic implications of the crisis. "General Marcus Okafor appears to be leading the coup," Sir William replied, consulting his notes. "He has a history of opposition to democratic governance and has made statements critical of Zambia's Commonwealth membership. Our intelligence suggests he may be receiving support from external powers who would prefer to see Zambia leave the Commonwealth entirely." The situation was exactly the sort of complex international crisis that had defined Edmund's expertise. For decades, he had served as Victoria's principal advisor on Commonwealth affairs, developing relationships with leaders across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific that often proved crucial during moments of political instability. His absence was felt most keenly in circumstances like these, where personal diplomacy and historical knowledge were essential tools for protecting British interests. "Schedule an emergency meeting with the Foreign Secretary and the Commonwealth Office," Victoria instructed. "I also want a briefing from the Chiefs of Staff about our military options in the region. And, Sir William, please contact the Archbishop of Canterbury. President Asani was a devout Christian, and there may be church networks that can provide information about his current status." As Sir William departed to arrange the requested meetings, Victoria turned to the secure telephone that connected her directly to Prime Minister Harrison. The Zambian crisis would require careful coordination between the Crown and the government, balancing constitutional monarchies' limited but important role in foreign affairs with the practical realities of protecting British citizens abroad. "Prime Minister," Victoria said when the connection was established, "I assume you've been briefed on the situation in Zambia. This crisis requires our immediate and coordinated response." "Indeed, Your Majesty," Harrison replied, his voice tense with concern. "We have nearly 3,000 British nationals in Zambia, including embassy staff, business executives, and aid workers. The new military government has not yet responded to our requests for assurances about their safety." Victoria spent the next 20 minutes discussing response options with the Prime Minister, drawing on her decades of experience with similar crises. She recalled the evacuation of British citizens from various trouble spots around the world, the delicate negotiations required to secure safe passage, and the importance of demonstrating resolve while avoiding unnecessary escalation. "I believe," Victoria said finally, "that we should consider utilizing the Royal Yacht Britannia's successor for this operation. HMS Victoria Edmund has the capability to evacuate large numbers of civilians while maintaining the dignity and neutral status that sometimes proves crucial in these situations." The mention of the ship named for her late husband brought a momentary pang of grief, but Victoria pushed through the emotion to focus on its practical capabilities. The modern royal yacht had been designed specifically for humanitarian missions, equipped with medical facilities, communication equipment, and diplomatic accommodation that could prove invaluable in the current crisis. The emergency meeting convened at 2 o'clock in the Churchill War Rooms, a location chosen for its secure communications and historical symbolism. Around the table sat Foreign Secretary Amanda Richardson, Commonwealth Secretary David Mills, Defense Secretary General Patricia Hawthorne, and the heads of Britain's intelligence services. "Your Majesty," Foreign Secretary Richardson began, "the situation in Zambia has deteriorated rapidly since this morning. General Okafor has suspended the Constitution and declared martial law. More concerning, he has announced that all foreign nationals must register with military authorities within 48 hours or face arrest as potential spies." Victoria listened intently as each official presented their assessment of the crisis. The intelligence reports painted a picture of a carefully planned coup with possible foreign backing, while military assessments suggested that evacuation operations would be challenging, but feasible if undertaken quickly. "What concerns me most," Victoria said when the briefings concluded, is the broader impact on Commonwealth unity. If we abandon Zambia to military dictatorship without attempting to support democratic restoration, it sends a message to other Commonwealth nations about the limits of our commitment to shared values. Commonwealth Secretary Mills nodded in agreement. Your Majesty raises an excellent point. Several other Commonwealth African nations are watching our response closely. A weak response could embolden anti-democratic forces throughout the region. The discussion continued for nearly 3 hours, with Victoria asking probing questions about evacuation logistics, diplomatic options, and potential consequences of various response scenarios. Her knowledge of Commonwealth affairs, developed over decades of state visits and diplomatic correspondence, proved invaluable in understanding the complex regional dynamics at play. General Hawthorne presented the military options available, including the use of Royal Navy ships positioned in nearby waters and Special Forces units trained for exactly this type of evacuation scenario. Your Majesty, we have HMS Victoria Edmund currently conducting exercises in the South Atlantic. She could reach Zambian waters within 36 hours and has the capacity to evacuate up to 2,000 civilians if necessary. Victoria felt a complex mixture of pride and sadness at the mention of the ship bearing Edmund's name being called into service for its first major humanitarian mission. He had been deeply involved in the vessel's design and construction, insisting on features that would maximize its usefulness for disaster relief and civilian evacuation operations. I believe, Victoria said finally, that we should pursue a multi-track approach. Deploy HMS Victoria Edmund immediately to provide evacuation capability for our nationals, while simultaneously engaging in diplomatic efforts to secure their safety and explore options for supporting democratic restoration in Zambia. The Prime Minister, who had been participating via secure video conference, agreed with Victoria's assessment. Your Majesty's suggestion aligns with our thinking. We are prepared to authorize the naval deployment immediately, and I will be speaking with other Commonwealth leaders tonight to coordinate a broader diplomatic response. As the meeting concluded, Victoria realized that she had just navigated her first major international crisis without Edmund's counsel and support. While the outcome remained uncertain, she felt confident that the decisions made today reflected both British interests and the values of constitutional democracy that she and Edmund had championed throughout their partnership. That evening brought a personal dimension to the Zambian crisis that Victoria had not anticipated. Among the British nationals trapped in the capital was Dr. Helen Morrison, a physician who had worked closely with several royal charities and had personally briefed Victoria on health conditions in developing Commonwealth nations. Your Majesty, Lady Margaret reported, Dr. Morrison managed to reach our embassy by satellite phone. She reports that conditions in the capital are deteriorating rapidly, with roadblocks being established by military units and foreign nationals being specifically targeted for harassment. Victoria felt the weight of personal responsibility for Dr. Morrison's safety. The physician had undertaken her dangerous work in Zambia partly at the encouragement of royal patronage for medical missions in underserved regions. Her current peril was a direct result of her commitment to service that mirrored the royal family's own dedication to Commonwealth welfare. Please ensure that Dr. Morrison's location and status receive priority attention in our evacuation planning, Victoria instructed. She has served our Commonwealth ideals with distinction, and we have a particular obligation to ensure her safety. The next 48 hours tested every aspect of Victoria's leadership abilities as the Zambian crisis unfolded in real time. Reports from the embassy painted an increasingly dire picture, with military units conducting house-to-house searches in expatriate neighborhoods and several British nationals being detained without charges. HMS Victoria Edmund's arrival in Zambian waters provided both practical evacuation capability and powerful symbolic leverage in negotiations with a new military government. The sight of the royal yacht, elegant, well-armed, and carrying the prestige of the British crown, anchored just outside territorial waters, sent an unmistakable message about Britain's commitment to protecting its citizens. Victoria spent hours each day in secure communication with various parties involved in the crisis. She spoke directly with several Commonwealth leaders, seeking their support for diplomatic pressure on the Zambian military government. Her personal relationships with these leaders, built over decades of state visits and official correspondence, proved crucial in securing coordinated Commonwealth action. The breakthrough came when Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa agreed to serve as a mediator between the British government and General Okafor. The Archbishop's moral authority and regional connections provided a channel for negotiations that avoided the appearance of foreign interference while maintaining pressure for the safe evacuation of British nationals. Your Majesty, the Archbishop told Victoria during a secure phone conversation, General Okafor claims to respect the Commonwealth and its values, though his actions suggest otherwise. I believe there may be an opportunity to secure safe passage for British citizens in exchange for recognition that this is an internal Zambian matter. Victoria carefully considered the Archbishop's proposal. Accepting the military government's legitimacy, even implicitly, went against her personal convictions about democratic governance. Yet the safety of 3,000 British nationals had to take priority over ideological preferences. Archbishop Tutu, Victoria replied, I place great trust in your judgment and your commitment to both human rights and practical solutions. If you believe this approach offers the best hope for protecting innocent lives, then I support your mediation efforts. The negotiation process stretched over 4 days, with Victoria monitoring developments around the clock while maintaining her regular schedule of domestic duties. The juxtaposition of hosting a garden party for local charity leaders while simultaneously managing an international crisis demonstrated the peculiar demands of modern monarchy. On the 5th day of the crisis, HMS Victoria Edmund began receiving British evacuees who had been transported from the capital under Archbishop Tutu's negotiated agreement. The sight of families boarding the royal yacht, many carrying nothing more than hastily packed suitcases, provided powerful imagery of the Crown's protective role that resonated throughout the Commonwealth. Dr. Helen Morrison was among the first evacuees to board HMS Victoria Edmund, and she managed to send a brief message to Victoria expressing her gratitude for the evacuation efforts. Your Majesty, the message read, the sight of your ship was like seeing a guardian angel. We never doubted that you would find a way to bring us home safely. The successful evacuation of British nationals marked only the beginning of the broader challenges posed by Zambia's return to military rule. Over the following weeks, Victoria worked with Commonwealth leaders to develop a coordinated response that balanced diplomatic pressure with respect for national sovereignty. The crisis had demonstrated several important truths about Victoria's evolving role as monarch. She had successfully navigated a complex international situation without Edmund's guidance, drawing on decades of experience while adapting to new realities. Her personal relationships with Commonwealth leaders had proven decisive in securing coordinated action, while her willingness to make difficult compromises had protected innocent lives. More importantly, the Zambian crisis had shown that the institution of monarchy remained relevant and effective in addressing contemporary challenges. The Crown's unique position, above partisan politics, but deeply committed to national interests, had provided diplomatic flexibility that proved crucial in resolving the crisis. As the last British evacuees departed Zambian waters aboard HMS Victoria Edmund, Victoria reflected on the lessons learned during this challenging period. She had proven to herself and to the watching world that she could provide decisive leadership during international crises while honoring the principles and relationships that she and Edmund had built together over 4 decades of service. The ship bearing Edmund's name had served with distinction in its first major mission, carrying nearly 2,000 evacuees to safety while demonstrating the continuing relevance of Royal Naval power in protecting British interests abroad. For Victoria, the successful mission represented both a practical achievement and a deeply personal tribute to her late husband's vision of active, engaged monarchy in service of Commonwealth ideals. The resolution of the Zambrian crisis had marked a turning point in Queen Victoria's adaptation to ruling alone, but the most challenging test of her renewed leadership lay ahead in the form of the long-planned Nordic Federation state visit. This diplomatic event, scheduled months before Edmund's death, will be the first major ceremonial occasion of Victoria's reign conducted without her beloved partner's presence. King Gustav VII of the Nordic Federation was arriving with his wife Queen Astrid for a 3-day visit that would include a state banquet at Buckingham Palace, addresses to Parliament, and extensive discussions about trade agreements, environmental cooperation, and security issues affecting both nations. The visit carried enormous diplomatic significance, as the Nordic Federation represented a powerful bloc of progressive democracies whose support was crucial for Britain's post-Brexit positioning in European affairs. The challenge was not merely ceremonial. Edmund had developed a particularly close relationship with King Gustav during their decades of correspondence and official visits. The two men had shared interests in environmental conservation, modern art, and technological innovation that had formed the foundation for numerous bilateral agreements between their nations. Gustav had specifically requested that the visit proceed as planned, viewing it as a tribute to Edmund's memory and a demonstration of continuity in Anglo-Nordic relations. Victoria stood in the white drawing room at Buckingham Palace, reviewing the final preparations for the state banquet that would formally welcome the Nordic delegation. The room had been transformed into a showcase of royal pageantry, with precious china, crystal, and silverware arranged on tables that could accommodate 160 guests representing the highest levels of British and Nordic society. Your Majesty, announced Lord Chamberlain Sir Richard Beaumont, the floral arrangements have been completed according to your specifications. The Nordic national colors have been incorporated tastefully, and we have included white roses throughout, Prince Edmund's favorite, as a subtle tribute. Victoria nodded approvingly as she surveyed the magnificent dining arrangements. The inclusion of Edmund's favorite flowers had been her personal touch, a way of honoring his memory while celebrating the friendship he had nurtured with her Nordic guests. She knew that King Gustav would understand the significance of the gesture and appreciate its diplomatic sensitivity. The guest list for the banquet represented a careful balance of diplomatic protocol, political necessity, and personal relationships. Prime Minister Harrison would be seated near King Gustav to facilitate discussion of trade negotiations, while prominent business leaders for both nations would have opportunities to explore expanded commercial cooperation. Victoria had also insisted on including representatives from environmental organizations, reflecting both nations' commitment to addressing climate change. Lady Margaret entered with the evening's final briefing materials, including updated talking points for Victoria's conversations with various guests and last-minute intelligence reports about political developments in the Nordic Federation that might affect the visit's outcomes. Your Majesty, Lady Margaret said quietly, King Gustav has specifically requested a private moment with you before the banquet begins. His private secretary indicates that he wishes to share some personal reflections about Prince Edmund's influence on Nordic-British relations. Victoria felt a familiar tightness in her chest at the prospect of discussing Edmund with someone who had known him well. These personal moments of remembrance, while meaningful, remained emotionally challenging even months after his death. Yet she understood that such conversations were an essential part of the diplomatic process, allowing foreign leaders to express condolences while reaffirming the personal relationships that underpinned international cooperation. The Nordic delegation had arrived that afternoon with the full ceremony befitting a state visit. Victoria had welcomed King Gustav and Queen Astrid a Horse Guards parade, riding with them in the traditional carriage procession down the mall to Buckingham Palace. The crowds lining the route had been substantial and enthusiastic, demonstrating public support for the alliance, while providing Victoria with another opportunity to show herself confidently fulfilling her ceremonial duties. King Gustav had appeared genuinely moved during the welcoming ceremony, particularly when the military band played selections that Edmund had specifically chosen for previous Nordic visits. The musical tribute had been another of Victoria's subtle gestures, acknowledging the personal dimension of diplomatic relationships while maintaining appropriate ceremonial dignity. The private meeting with King Gustav took place in the blue drawing room, away from the formal protocol and media attention surrounding the larger visit. Gustav, a man in his early 60s with the informal manner characteristic of modern Nordic royalty, spoke with obvious emotion about his memories of Edmund. "Your Majesty," Gustav began, "Edmund was more than a diplomatic colleague. He was a true friend who understood the challenges facing modern monarchies and democratic societies. His insights about balancing tradition with progress influenced my own approach to constitutional monarchy." Victoria listened as Gustav shared specific memories of his interactions with Edmund. Their collaboration on renewable energy initiatives, their frank discussions about the evolving role of monarchy in the 21st century, and their shared commitment to using royal influence for environmental and social causes. "I want you to know," Gustav continued, "that the Nordic Federation's commitment to our alliance with Britain extends far beyond governmental agreements. Edmund helped create personal bonds between our peoples that will endure regardless of political changes in either of our nations." The conversation lasted nearly an hour, covering everything from shared environmental goals to the practical challenges of maintaining royal relevance in increasingly egalitarian societies. Victoria found herself drawing strength from Gustav's perspective on Edmund's legacy, particularly his emphasis on the lasting institutional changes that Edmund had helped achieve. "Your late husband once told me," Gustav recalled, "that the measure of successful monarchy was not in the pageantry or protocol, but in the positive changes achieved through patient, persistent service." Tonight's banquet honors that principle by advancing the cooperation he worked so hard to establish. As they prepared to join the evening's festivities, Victoria felt a renewed sense of purpose about the diplomatic mission ahead. The state banquet would be more than mere ceremony. It would be a working session where important agreements could be finalized and new initiatives launched. The banquet itself exceeded even Victoria's high expectations. The conversation flowed naturally among guests who shared common interests in democratic governance, environmental protection, and cultural exchange. Victoria found herself engaged in substantive discussions about everything from Arctic research cooperation to joint initiatives for supporting developing democracies. During her formal toast, Victoria spoke movingly about the partnership between their nations while subtly acknowledging Edmund's role in building their relationship. "The bonds between our peoples," she said, "are strengthened by shared values, mutual respect, and the conviction that small nations can achieve great things when they work together in common purpose." King Gustav's responding toast was equally eloquent, praising both Edmund's contributions and Victoria's leadership during a challenging period. "Your Majesty has demonstrated that the institution of constitutional monarchy remains vibrant and relevant," he declared. "Your grace during personal adversity while maintaining unwavering commitment to public service inspires Democrats everywhere." The evening's most significant diplomatic breakthrough came during an informal conversation between Victoria and Nordic Federation Prime Minister Elena Sandberg about refugee assistance programs. Both nations were grappling with increased migration pressures, and Sandberg proposed a joint initiative to improve refugee integration services while sharing the financial burden more equitably. "Your Majesty," Prime Minister Sandberg explained, "we believe that comprehensive refugee support, including education, job training, and cultural orientation, ultimately benefits both the refugees themselves and the host communities. Britain's experience with Commonwealth migration could provide valuable insights for our program development." Victoria recognized the proposal's potential for addressing one of the most challenging issues facing both nations. The idea of combining British Commonwealth experience with Nordic social service expertise could create a model for other democratic nations struggling with similar challenges. The second day of the state visit included King Gustav's address to Parliament, where he spoke eloquently about the shared democratic values that bound their nations together. His speech emphasized environmental cooperation, technological innovation, and the importance of maintaining strong democratic institutions in an era of rising authoritarianism worldwide. Victoria attended the parliamentary session, sitting in the traditional royal gallery while Gustav addressed both houses of parliament. The speech represented a high point of public diplomacy, with Gustav praising Britain's democratic traditions while outlining specific areas where enhanced cooperation could benefit both nations. The most personal moment of the visit came during a private tour of the Royal Art Collection, where Gustav and Astrid viewed paintings and sculptures that Edmund had particularly loved. Victoria served as their personal guide, sharing stories about Edmund's passion for contemporary Nordic artists and his efforts to include their work in the royal collection. Edmund always said that art transcends political boundaries. Victoria told her guests as they stood before a striking landscape by a contemporary Norwegian painter. He believed that cultural exchange was the foundation of lasting peace between nations. Queen Astrid, who had remained largely quiet during the more formal diplomatic events, spoke warmly about her own memories of Edmund's enthusiasm for Nordic culture. He was genuinely curious about our traditions and customs, she recalled. His questions about our social systems and cultural practices showed real interest in learning from our experience. The third day of the visit focused on practical cooperation initiatives, with detailed discussions about trade agreements, research partnerships, and joint responses to global challenges. Victoria participated in these working sessions alongside government officials, contributing insights based on her decades of diplomatic experience and her understanding of Commonwealth perspectives on the issues under discussion. The visit's most tangible outcome was the signing of a comprehensive environmental cooperation agreement that established joint research programs, shared renewable energy initiatives, and coordinated policies for addressing climate change. The agreement, built directly on work that Edmund had begun, representing a fitting tribute to his environmental advocacy. As the Nordic delegation prepared to depart, King Gustav presented Victoria with a personal gift from the royal family, a specially commissioned sculpture created by a prominent Nordic artist. The piece, titled Continuity, depicted intertwined trees representing the enduring nature of friendship despite the passage of seasons and the challenges of time. "Your Majesty," Gustav said as he presented the sculpture, "this represents our admiration for your strength during these difficult months and our confidence in the continuing vitality of the relationship that you and Edmund built together." The successful completion of the Nordic state visit represented a major milestone in Victoria's adaptation to sole leadership. She had successfully managed complex diplomatic negotiations while maintaining the personal relationships that were crucial to effective international cooperation. More importantly, she had demonstrated that the monarchy could continue to play a meaningful role in advancing British interests on the global stage. The visit had also provided personal healing for Victoria in ways she had not anticipated. The warm memories shared by Gustav and Astrid about Edmund had helped her process her grief while reinforcing her understanding of the positive legacy he had left behind. Their obvious respect for his contributions and their confidence in her ability to carry on his work provided validation that meant far more than formal diplomatic protocols. In the weeks following the Nordic visit, Victoria reflected on the lessons learned about leadership, diplomacy, and the healing power of meaningful work. The intensive 3 days of negotiations, ceremonies, and personal interactions had reminded her why she and Edmund had devoted their lives to public service. The ability to facilitate cooperation between nations, to build bridges across cultural differences, and to advance shared values through patient diplomatic work remained as rewarding as ever. The agreements reached with the Nordic Federation would have concrete benefits for millions of citizens in both nations. Environmental research partnerships would accelerate the development of renewable energy technologies. Cultural exchange programs would enhance mutual understanding between young people. Trade agreements would create economic opportunities while strengthening political ties. But perhaps most importantly, the visit had demonstrated that the institution of constitutional monarchy retained its relevance and effectiveness in addressing 21st century challenges. Victoria's ability to combine ceremonial dignity with substantive policy engagement had impressed her Nordic counterparts while advancing British interests in ways that purely governmental diplomacy might not have achieved. As she prepared for the next phase of her reign, Victoria felt confident that she had successfully navigated the transition from partnership to sole leadership. The challenges ahead remained formidable: ongoing international crises, domestic political tensions, and the personal journey of grief that continued beneath her public duties. But the Nordic visit had proven that she possessed the knowledge, experience, and resilience necessary to serve effectively as sovereign while honoring Edmund's memory through continued dedication to the values they had shared. 6 months had passed since Prince Consort Edmund's death, and Queen Victoria's transformation from grieving widow to confident sole ruler had reached a moment of profound recognition. The Autumn Commonwealth Leaders' Conference, held every 4 years in London, represented the pinnacle of her diplomatic responsibilities and the ultimate test of her ability to lead the 54-nation association that Edmund had helped guide for decades. The conference brought together heads of government from across the Commonwealth, representing nearly a third of the world's population and encompassing every continent. For Victoria, it represented both an enormous responsibility and a deeply personal tribute to Edmund's legacy of Commonwealth service. He had attended every conference for the past 40 years, often serving as an informal mediator during difficult negotiations and a bridge between different regional perspectives. Victoria stood in the Lancaster House Conference Hall, watching as technicians made final adjustments to the seating arrangements and communications equipment that would facilitate discussions among leaders representing vastly different political systems, economic circumstances, and cultural traditions. The diversity of the Commonwealth had always been both its greatest strength and its most significant challenge. "Your Majesty," announced Commonwealth Secretary David Mills, "the final delegation has arrived. Prime Minister Singh from India will be representing the South Asian caucus, and President Okoye for Nigeria is leading the African bloc. Both have specifically requested private audiences with you before the formal sessions begin." Victoria nodded, understanding the significance of these requests. India and Nigeria represented the Commonwealth's 2 largest democracies by population, and their support was crucial for any major initiatives that might emerge from the conference. Their leaders wanted to discuss regional security issues and economic cooperation programs that could benefit hundreds of millions of Commonwealth citizens. The conference agenda reflected the complex challenges facing the modern world: climate change, economic inequality, democratic governance, technological development, and international security. Victoria would play a unique role as the symbolic head of the Commonwealth, providing continuity and moral authority while the elected leaders grappled with practical policy decisions. The opening ceremony took place in Westminster Abbey, where Victoria delivered an address that had been carefully crafted to honor Edmund's memory while outlining her vision for the Commonwealth's future. She spoke to an audience that included not only the assembled leaders, but also millions of Commonwealth citizens watching via television and internet broadcasts. "We gather today," Victoria began, "in the spirit of cooperation and mutual respect that has defined the Commonwealth for over 7 decades. This association of free nations, bound together by shared values rather than imposed obligations, represents humanity's best hope for addressing the challenges of our interconnected world." The speech continued with specific references to Edmund's contributions to Commonwealth development, particularly his advocacy for educational exchanges, environmental protection, and support for emerging democracies. Victoria spoke with obvious emotion about his vision of a Commonwealth that served as a force for peace and prosperity rather than merely a historical curiosity. Prince Consort Edmund often said that the Commonwealth's strength lay not in its formal institutions, but in the relationships between its peoples, Victoria continued. He believed that understanding and friendship across cultural boundaries could overcome the divisions that have plagued human civilization for centuries. The audience, which included many leaders who had known Edmund personally, responded with sustained applause that clearly reflected genuine respect for his memory and appreciation for Victoria's tribute. Several African leaders were visibly moved, having worked closely with Edmund on initiatives to support democratic transitions in their region. The ceremonial aspects of the conference, while important for symbolic purposes, represented only a small portion of Victoria's responsibilities during the four-day event. Her real work took place in the private meetings, informal conversations, and behind-the-scenes negotiations that often determined whether ambitious declarations would translate into concrete action. Her first major challenge came during a private meeting with Prime Minister Chun Wei of Singapore and President Maria Santos of the Caribbean Federation. Both leaders were expressing frustration with what they saw as the Commonwealth's inadequate response to climate change, particularly the failure to establish binding commitments for carbon emission reductions among member nations. Your Majesty, Prime Minister Chun said frankly, our nations face existential threats from rising sea levels and extreme weather events. We need the Commonwealth to move beyond symbolic gestures to mandatory action that will actually address the scale of the crisis we face. Victoria listened carefully to their concerns, understanding that small island nations and low-lying territories had legitimate fears about their long-term survival. At the same time, she knew that larger Commonwealth nations, particularly those with significant fossil fuel industries, were resistant to binding international commitments that might constrain their economic development. I share your urgency about climate action, Victoria replied, but we must also acknowledge the political realities facing different member nations. Perhaps we can explore a graduated approach that recognizes varying national circumstances while still achieving meaningful progress toward our shared environmental goals. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, with Victoria drawing on her experience from the Nordic Federation visit to suggest practical cooperation mechanisms that might bridge the gap between environmental necessity and political feasibility. Her proposal for voluntary partnerships between developed and developing Commonwealth nations, supported by technology transfer and financial assistance programs, gained traction as a potential compromise solution. The second day of the conference brought Victoria's most challenging diplomatic test when tensions erupted between the South Asian and Middle Eastern delegations over regional security issues. The dispute threatened to overshadow the entire conference and potentially damage Commonwealth unity for years to come. The crisis began during a working session on international terrorism when Pakistan's Prime Minister Rashid Ahmed accused several Gulf nations of insufficient cooperation in tracking extremist financing networks. The accusation prompted an angry response from the Gulf Cooperation Council representatives, who questioned Pakistan's own commitment to combating terrorism within its borders. Victoria found herself in the delicate position of mediating between allies while maintaining the Commonwealth tradition of not interfering in bilateral disputes between member nations. She called an emergency meeting with the disputant leaders, drawing on her decades of experience with similar conflicts to find common ground. Gentlemen, Victoria said firmly as the meeting began, the Commonwealth has survived for 70 years precisely because we have learned to disagree with respect and to find shared solutions to common challenges. The terrorism threat affects all our nations, and our enemies will be delighted to see us divided by mutual recriminations. The mediation process required Victoria to shuttle between different groups of leaders, exploring various compromise formulations while gradually building support for a joint anti-terrorism initiative that addressed everyone's concerns without assigning blame for past failures. Her success in resolving the dispute demonstrated the continuing value of the Crown's neutral status in facilitating Commonwealth cooperation. The breakthrough came when Victoria suggested establishing a Commonwealth Counterterrorism Coordination Center that would improve information sharing while respecting national sovereignty and avoiding the appearance of one nation dominating others. The proposal satisfied both sides by creating new mechanisms for cooperation without requiring admissions of past inadequacies. The third day of the conference focused on economic development initiatives, an area where Edmund had been particularly active in promoting trade relationships between Commonwealth nations. Victoria found herself drawing heavily on his expertise as she participated in discussions about preferential trading arrangements, investment promotion, and support for small business development across the association. During a working lunch with the African Economic Council delegation, Victoria learned about innovative microfinance programs that were helping rural entrepreneurs access capital for agricultural improvements and small business development. The success stories from Kenya, Ghana, and Botswana suggested models that could be adapted for other developing Commonwealth nations. Your Majesty, explained President Amara Cohn of the West African Economic Union. These programs have helped thousands of women start small businesses that support their families while contributing to local economic development. With Commonwealth support, we could expand these initiatives to reach millions more entrepreneurs across our region. Victoria recognized the potential for these programs to address multiple Commonwealth priorities simultaneously: gender equality, poverty reduction, and economic development. She committed Royal Foundation resources to support pilot programs while encouraging other member nations to consider similar initiatives. The conference's most emotional moment came during the closing ceremony, when the assembled leaders unanimously approved the Edmund Partnership for Commonwealth Development, a comprehensive initiative that would coordinate educational exchanges, environmental protection, and democratic governance support across all member nations. This partnership, Victoria said in accepting the dedication to Edmund's memory, represents the values he championed throughout his life: cooperation over competition, understanding over prejudice, and hope over cynicism. I am deeply moved by your commitment to carrying forward his vision of a Commonwealth that serves all its peoples. The partnership would establish exchange programs for students, teachers, and civil servants, create joint research initiatives for addressing climate change and sustainable development, and provide technical assistance for nations transitioning to democratic governance. The scope and ambition of the program exceeded anything previously attempted in Commonwealth history. As the conference concluded, Victoria reflected on the transformation she had undergone during the 6 months since Edmund's death. The shy, uncertain woman who had struggled to imagine carrying on without her beloved partner had evolved into a confident leader capable of navigating complex international negotiations while inspiring others to pursue ambitious collaborative goals. The success of the Commonwealth Leaders Conference had demonstrated that the institution of constitutional monarchy retained its relevance and effectiveness in addressing 21st century challenges. Victoria's ability to combine ceremonial dignity with substantive policy engagement had impressed world leaders while advancing British interests and Commonwealth cooperation in ways that purely governmental diplomacy might not have achieved. More personally, the conference had provided Victoria with a sense of completion in her journey from grief to renewed purpose. The warm tributes to Edmund's memory, combined with the leader's obvious confidence in her ability to carry on his work, had helped her understand that honoring his legacy required not dwelling on loss, but rather embracing the future with the same optimism and determination that had characterized their partnership. In her final private diary entry of the conference week, Victoria wrote, "Edmund would be proud of what we accomplished together during these 4 days. The Commonwealth he loved remains vibrant and committed to the values we shared. I no longer feel that I am carrying the crown alone. I carry it forward, supported by the relationships he helped build and inspired by the vision we developed together." The months ahead would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and the ongoing responsibilities of constitutional monarchy in a rapidly changing world. But Victoria faced them with confidence born of proven competence and the knowledge that grief had been transformed into purpose. She had not merely survived Edmund's death. She had used it as a foundation for renewed service and deeper commitment to the principles that had guided their remarkable partnership. The Queen had stepped back into her duties not as a diminished figure struggling to fill an impossible void, but as a strengthened leader who had learned to honor the past while embracing the future. The Commonwealth, the monarchy, and the millions of people who looked to both institutions for stability and Inspiration had been well served by her courage in choosing service over sorrow, duty over despair. As the final delegates departed London, Victoria stood once again at the windows of Windsor Palace, looking out over gardens that were now preparing for winter. But, unlike that morning 6 months earlier when the view had seemed to reflect only loss and uncertainty, she now saw the eternal cycle of renewal that characterized both nature and human institutions. Spring would come again, as it always had, and she would be ready to meet its challenges with wisdom gained through sorrow and strength forged in service.